Well, hello everybody, my name is Louise Savage. An extremely warm welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you're a returning viewer, and welcome if you're new. I just want to really thank everybody who's subscribed to my channel, because I've just hit that magic number of 5,000 subscribers, which is just seems, well, I don't know, I just can't believe that so many people are interested in what I've got to say, all my waffle slash musing, but there we are, that's the way the world is. So I was thinking, I've been reading this novel called Lucy Gayheart by Willa Cather. I've never read anything by Willa Cather before, American writer. This novel was written in the 1930s, but it's set in at the beginning of that century, and it opens with the young Lucy Gayheart. She's a young musician, and there are these wonderful scenes of her skating with her bow on the frozen river, and those descriptions of winter and of ice and of snow just made me sort of feel really seasonal, and started to get me thinking about, why do I like reading books that are set in the winter when winter is coming? And very often the books that I've chosen to share with you today are ones that I've realised have got some quite common threads, not necessarily remotely positive stories at all, but books that I just certainly have snow and ice in them, but also just give you this whole world that you can become quite wrapped up in and engaged with during the cold winter months. I was thinking back to my childhood and stories that fascinated me as a child, and one of the first story, in fact the first time I ever went to the theatre, my mum took me to see an amateur production of The Snow Queen, and I know that this book, it's a very sunny day here and I'm not brilliant with my camera and light, as you all know, but this is an edition of Hans Andersen's fairy stories. I loved this book as a child, and you can see on the back, look, is an illustration from The Snow Queen. And The Snow Queen, of course, is a story. In fact, the illustration on the front is as well. I think that's Gerda, and I think that's Kay. And Gerda and Kay are two young children, and the Snow Queen comes along and puts ice in Kay's heart, and he's snatched away from Gerda. And it's just this really tense, amazing, very sinister fairy story. But I absolutely love this book. There we are, The Snow Queen Part First. There's the illustration from the book. And I think, you know, again, I think this is one of those books that hooked me on reading. I remember that I was able to just about read it on my own. It says, "To Louise in here with lots of love and a happy birthday from Mummy and Daddy, November 1972. There we are, look, in my mum's handwriting. And I've added a Savage there. It's obviously very important that everybody knows that this is Louise Savage's book, not just any old Louise. So my 7-year-old self really treasured this and did sort of attempt to read it to herself and to her sisters. And I think, again, you know, obviously in The Snow Queen there are all those depictions of snow and ice, and I think of books like Little Women, you know, there's the most fantastic evocation of winter and Christmas in that novel. That was a very early read of mine. And things like Narnia as well, of course, where there's an eternal winter. So yeah, I've got some sort of very cold, very chilly books to share with you today, and I would recommend Lucy Gayheart. I've not finished it yet, so I can't sort of comment on it in its entirety, but yeah, it's going well. Anyway, so the first one I chose was Steph Penny's Under a Pole Star. Now, most of these novels are really chunky, and I think there's a reason for that. I think in the winter there's more time to commit to reading because the nights are going darker, certainly on this hemisphere anyway. Obviously I've got a very Eurocentric view of this. And so snuggling up with a nice, thick, chunky book that can take you to a cold place, so you're kind of almost echoing what's happening outside, I think is really important. Now, I read this quite a few years ago now. I still haven't read Steph Penny's Tenderness of Wolves, which I really ought to do. But this novel is about the exploration of the Arctic, but the Arctic Circle. But the twist is that it's the story of a female explorer. And I think that makes it really interesting in itself. It starts off, I think, in about 1948 on a boat that's heading towards the Arctic, and Flora is a very old lady at this stage, and she's on this boat. It's a bit of a kind of what's the word, press sort of trick really to get her to talk, I think. And she starts to reflect on her past, and so we travel in time back to her childhood, but also back to the periods when she was exploring in the Arctic herself. So we see elements of her childhood when she grows up with her father, who's the captain of a whaling ship that sails to Greenland, and she goes with him, and she meets the Inuit community, and she learns the language so that she can communicate with them. And there is an awful lot in this novel about communication, but also about the treatment of the Indigenous people. So as an older, not an older woman, as a young woman, she goes off to explore the Arctic, and she meets this young explorer from New York, or pioneer, perhaps from an American perspective, called Jacob, and they have this extremely sensual affair. And it is a very sexy book. You know, there are lots of sex scenes in here. So you've got the sort of contrast between the coldness of the environment and the sort of heat of their relationship, which is played out, I think, brilliantly in here. It's very physical, and all the sort of fumbling under layers of clothes and that sort of thing. Now, it transpires that Jacob and another male explorer disappeared in really unusual circumstances, and that is gradually unstitched as you read the novel. So there's a kind of thriller element to it as well, which again I think is an ingredient in the books that I've chosen, or some of them. So yeah, it's a really interesting take on exploring that part of the world. The descriptions of the ice and the snow and the cold, and again that's a common thread through all these novels, is really beautifully done. The physicality of the young people is really well done. I think sometimes the emotional side is not explained particularly well. I don't know if we really truly get to the psychology of the characters, but I can kind of forgive it for that. And the other thing that I really like about it is that Steph Penny's very honest about the treatment of the Inuit, particularly from the male explorers, and the way that they, you know, they commit real atrocities because of their outlook at the time on these people. I mean, I know I have a Victorian atlas somewhere here that was my great grandfather's, and in it the Eskimo are categorized as animals, you know, and she's sort of kind of tried to reflect that appalling attitude that pervaded in the Victorian era. So yeah, I found this a really enjoyable read, and again, you know, one that captures the snow, the ice, the cold really beautifully. Next up is a book that I've probably banged on about before, and this is Cold Martin by Charles Frazier. This was a debut novel that just absolutely stole the show. I can't remember what year it was published. It was in the 90s, I think. But it topped the New York Times bestseller list for 60 odd weeks, I think. And I'm really not surprised, because it's just that in this novel, the psychology of the characters is absolutely superb. So it's the story of a young American soldier. It's the end of the Civil War. He's journeying back through his absolutely ravaged and devastated country to get back to the love of his life, Ada, who is also having her own struggles in the sort of homestead where she lives. And again, you know, there are different seasons in here, but one of the things that I really remember is the snow and the ice and the discomfort and the real sort of grist. It's a really grueling journey. And again, a thread through a lot of these novels is the isolation. You know, he's a young soldier and he's completely on his own for most of that journey, and often having to hide out and be really careful about, you know, who he meets. And a lot of it is about his relationship with nature and the environment around him as well. And that, seeing that as a kind of battle. But also you get the sense that the world has completely changed because of the human activity of civil war, the world is never going to be the same again, and that's part of the threat. As he's journeying home, and he gets very ill, and oh my goodness, it's really lived in my head for all the years since I read it. And the title is chilly, isn't it? Cold Mountain. Next up is a novel called Wolf Winter. I don't see this in bookshops very often, by Cecilia Eckback. And again, it's another novel that I really love. Now we go back to the 1700s. There's a lot of historical fiction here, you'll notice. We go back to the 1777 or something like that. And this is the story of a group of Finnish people who go to live in Lapland. Or is it the other way around? My brain's just deserted me. I think it's that way around. And they're sort of, again, it's exploratory. They're going into this new territory, and again, the cold, the ice, it's pervasive, and because they're living in this very, very tough, very small community, everybody seems to be suspicious of everybody else. It's really not a very warm, friendly place to live. I mean, warm in the social sense. And it's about a husband and wife and their two daughters, and you know, their experience of being pioneers in this way. And the other thing about the community is that there have been some disappearances. People have disappeared, especially children. And then one of the daughters stumble across the body of a man, a dead body, and he's been disemboweled, all his guts are hanging out. And the local community blame it on the wolves, they blame it on nature. But the mother in the story doesn't believe that. She thinks it's the action of humans, and she becomes determined to find out what has gone awry here. So again, like Steph Penny's book, it's almost like a thriller. You've got this sense of mystery about this horrible corpse. You've got this sort of gloom hanging over the community, and it's sort of thrillery / detective-y / Scandinavian noir-y, but set in this 18th century community. Again, there's a lot in here about isolation, about the idea of a very small and isolated community and what that leads people to do or not do, which I found really, really interesting. And it becomes very pacey as well. So again, I think, you know, again, it's a big chunky book, and we've got these long dark nights to contend with, so something that keeps you on the edge of your seat, and also sort of, you know, gives you a kind of contrast to the Santa Lapland image that we're being bombarded with at this time of year. I thoroughly recommend. The next book I chose was Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I read this twice when I was younger, and haven't read it sort of in the last few decades. But this book had an enormous impression on me as a young woman. I was really fascinated in Russian history when I was younger. And the way that Tolstoy, I mean, obviously he is Russian, or was Russian. He's a contemporary of Dickens. I mean, the novel was serialised in the same way that Dickens novels would at the end of the 19th century. And so again, you've got this wonderful, you can sort of really climb into this world and spend hours with Anna and all the other characters. Now, the reason I chose this is because, again, it's Russia. So, you know, the winter is long and cold and bitter, and there are lots of sort of dramatic sledge rides. And so you know, you're very, very aware of the seasons in this novel and the biting Russian cold. It tells the story of Anna, who is extremely beautiful. She's high society. She's married to an extremely wealthy man who's got real political ambition. She has a young son who she absolutely adores, but her marriage is cold, and she falls in love with this young single man called Vronsky, and they have this torrid affair. Now, Anna's sort of issues, really, one of the things I absolutely love about her character, it's not really the scandal of the affair that destroys her, it's the fact that she's indiscreet. I mean, her husband, Karenin, he's not bothered about the affair from the point of view of his own relationship with his wife. He doesn't care really what she does. It's the fact that the public become aware, that it becomes a society talking point. And so I find this novel absolutely fascinating in terms of looking at the social pressure on women, particularly women at the time, the way that women are judged so differently from men, the sort of self-destruction. It's a bit like Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary, you know, that she sort of, Anna sort of sets herself on this path to complete annihilation of who she is, from the minute the affair begins. And again, it's all against this backdrop of Russian high society and balls and ballets and operas and you name it. The other thing that's wonderful about this is that there's also another relationship in it between a character called Levin and Kitty. Apparently, that relationship was autobiographical, or loosely so. And that seems to represent a reasonably content marriage. So you've got this kind of real kind of counterpoint contrast to the destruction that Anna is wreaking on her own marriage. And it, you know, the affair does not end well. It takes her in all sorts of appalling directions. It's I think it's a fascinating read, and I think Tolstoy is a consummate storyteller. I really urge you to pick it up and give it a go if you haven't done. And finally, people don't always associate Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with snow and ice. But for me, so I'm sure you know, you may well know the outline of the story, you might have seen the film, but have you read the book? I don't know. But Frankenstein, of course, is the doctor who sets out to create this kind of perfect creature. Unfortunately, he's used body parts from all sorts of different, you know, he's taken the best eyes and the best nose and the best whatever, and ends up with this really ugly, horrific, on the outside, hodgepodge of a creation who comes to life. But for me, and again, I would urge you to read it if you've never read it, one of the most powerful scenes in literature is when Frankenstein's creature, and he's not a monster, he's a creature to Mary Shelley, when Frankenstein's creature stands in the Alps by this glacier and begs Dr. Frankenstein to create a female version of himself so that he can have a companion. I mean, it's one of the most persuasive pieces of writing, dialogue, I think I've ever read. I absolutely love it. And also, of course, there's the Arctic featuring again in this novel. So we've got lots of cold and snow and ice here too. And a great sort of, you know, it's a really compelling read, and a great book to tuck yourself up with in all this winter cold and bleakness. So there you go. Some lovely wintry reads. They'll keep you well entertained, well into the dark nights. Please let me know, as ever. I love your recommendations. I mean, I do go out and buy many of them. I do read them, but obviously it takes me a long time because I get lots and lots of them. But it's brilliant because often it takes me down a reading wormhole that I wouldn't normally choose. And I just love this community of book sharing and sharing the love of books. It's been an absolute privilege to do this for the last 2 years, and yeah, 5,000, who knew? It just seems crazy. Anyway, I'm off. I'm going to go and curl up with a book now because the sun is dipping. It's heading towards darkness, so yeah, I'm going to go and curl up with Lucy Gayheart. Take care. Bye.